Despite being an action cartoon primarily focusing on blending humour and superpowered alien punch-ons, Ben 10 has a lot of romance plots, and a whole lot of various love interests popping in and out of the story, only becoming more frequent the further into the series we get. And fair enough, with the initial series following a 10-year-old Ben, it's pretty reasonable that we don't see all too much more than a fleeting childhood crush. Then come Ben 10 Alien Force, they really ramp things up, matching that more mature tone. All the lead characters transitioning into some more serious, young adult feeling actual relationships. And Omniverse just really throws everything romance related against the wall and waits to see what sticks, then rips down whatever did stick and throws it back at the wall all over again. Going into this, we'll be borrowing a lot from Lydia Love's timelines, and as such, we'll be approaching this video in a similar way to how she breaks down the various love lives of adult animated characters. Only rather than Brian Griffin or whatever, we'll be talking about all aspects of Ben 10's love life. Even if you are familiar with the series, I suspect there may be one or two inclusions on this list that may either surprise you or dig up some long forgotten memories. The classic series introduces us to Ben's first love interest, Kai Green, the granddaughter of one of Grandpa Max's mates, who, along with her grandfather, gets swept up in everything surrounding the LeBowen running amok. Ben is immediately smitten with her, right from the first glance. It's quite sweet actually seeing this softer side to Ben, especially as the episode plays out and we see him trying to impress her. Ben coming from this really sincere puppy love sort of angle. An unintentional connection there, Kai does start to take some interest in Ben due to his, what was at the time, presumed to be a Navajo werewolf transformation, only to lose some interest when Ben turns back to human. Her being bummed that she couldn't train him like some kind of pet. It's a brief enough romance but feels really fitting given the summer road trip episodic feel the classic series had. And it was especially nice, following Kai possibly being a little too open with Ben as to why she's no longer interested in him, we have Gwen giving Kai a piece of her mind, really showing just how much she cares for him. Even if they butt heads so often, Ben's still her cousin. And that's where we'll leave Kai for now. I honestly think their dynamic, more broadly, is such a good way to handle childhood crushes, being that age and falling for that person you've just met on a road trip who you'll likely never bump into ever again. The more specifics of Kai's interest in Ben is a bit odd, but we'll get into that later in the video. Not to get too ahead of ourselves, but she'll be coming back into the story in a big way. Now getting into who is, or at least was certainly Ben's primary love interest at the time of Alien Force through Ultimate Alien, and the only character Ben's actually been in a committed long-term relationship with, Julie Yamamoto. We'll get into the way the series mishandled their breakup. It certainly didn't feel like a fitting conclusion to a 6-season-long relationship. I've never been all too fussed on them as a couple, however I do love what it does for the series. It's so nicely representative of the shift in tone and the theme come Alien Force. We're really seeing Ben grow up here, along with the others, going from a fleeting childhood crush with a girl he didn't really know to a more slowly paced out, slowly developing adult relationship. What I'm getting at is Ben's relationship with Julie is so representative of the added pressures of growing up Ben does in Alien Force. On top of the initial secret identity, schooling, and superheroing about the place, he's now maintaining a relationship. Not like it's all one-sided though, Julie really becoming someone Ben can lean on. I mentioned I wasn't all too fast in their relationship, but despite that, I have to give major credit to the showrunners. There's no prolonged will they won't they. The pair of them hitting off pretty much straight away, and end up going on a date, where again, they quickly brush past the idea of Ben keeping the Omnitrix and everything surrounding it a big secret, with Julie finding out about it and being accepting of it nearly right away. I like how sweet they are towards one another, but unfortunately beyond that, we don't really explore Julie all that much. I want to like Julie more, but she isn't really fleshed out enough to really find myself all that attached to as a character. That being despite the fact that she's sort of a pseudo fourth member of the Alien Force trio, which only highlights the lack of development between Julie and Ben when they're so often paired with Kevin and Gwen, who have a fantastic, slowly developing relationship over the series. Maybe I should make a video on their relationship, let me know if you'd be keen to see that. On underdeveloped characters, foreshadowing a bit for later, future love interests of the show somehow feel way more developed with a fraction of the screen time. To Julie's credit, she does hold Ben accountable and tell him to pull his head in when he's so frequently, in classic Alien Force style, regressing as a character and forgetting lessons he's learnt time and time again. And something I'm not fond of, but I do think is handled incredibly well, Ben isn't really a good boyfriend to Julie at times, that only becoming more so the case as we go from Alien Force to Ultimate Alien, where that upcoming breakup would have worked perfectly, Ben treating Julie really poorly one too many times. I've said it before, but I think if you're going to break these two up, the episode Duped would have been the perfect chance to do so. During Julie's big tennis match, Ben gets sidetracked by some villains, arriving to her big moment late, taking that attention away from her and being completely unapologetic or remotely remorseful. Then later, and again to stress what is presumably Julie's maybe biggest day of her tennis career, he goes off to see a film. There's also some shenanigans with Ben splitting himself up into three, one actively making an even bigger scene and yelling out while she's playing, and all this ending with what could have been a really great tender moment between the two of them, but Julie just accepts that this is what dating a superhero is, then taking off frustrated when she finds out this is more so about him seeing a film than stopping the Forever Nights. Now keep in mind, Julie and Ben are still in a relationship for the next entry on this list. Getting into Ultimate Alien's take on a brief romance with someone Ben's only just met in Eunice. The Alien Force trio discover a pod that scans Gwen's DNA and out pops Eunice. Eunice then joining them on their camping trip, with it being very quickly revealed that she's the Unitrix, a prototype offshoot of the Omnitrix, only capable of sampling one DNA sample at a time that can then go on to mimic the abilities of surrounding species. So what she's functionally done is scan Gwen as a human DNA source and become a human transformation. All the oddness aside, her character actually feels really grounded. There's larger questions surrounding her on if she's a sentient being or a device. Ben even stands up to Azimuth over that very question. And in terms of her being a love interest, despite being introduced in this very same episode and having no background or previous personality whatsoever, her character feels so much better explored than Julie's somehow. Circling back to it, it does feel a bit strange that she's in a brief fling with Ben after using Gwen as a DNA sample, but the episode is quick to point out through Azimuth that the DNA was fully randomized after being sampled. That said, for whatever reason, that's retconned in Omniverse, with the writer saying she is now related to Ben. Now back to Ben being a bit crook, Ben's still actively in a relationship with Julie during all of this. They for whatever reason paired off Eunice as this really sweet, lost character, questioning what it means to be alive, while Ben is going through some major character assassination here. I really don't enjoy that. And this brings with it a very reasonable second opportunity for the series to break up Julie and Ben if they were going to do so. Jumping around in the timeline a bit while we're on that, come Omniverse, we get the reveal that Ben incidentally broke things off with Julie while not really paying attention to her during a phone call while he was preoccupied playing Sumo Slammers, him yelling all sorts at the game, Julie thinking he's yelling at her, Ben giving her the impression he's ending things over the phone. This just doesn't feel too fitting for a relationship that spanned 2 series, but whatever. I did like what they did with her from here, the pair of them making up and deciding to keep a friendship, really showing a level of maturity that wasn't really all too present during Ultimate Alien. And our last brief entry before getting into Omniverse proper, we have Jennifer Nocturne, who makes a brief appearance on this list. Jennifer being a young but still adult character who has a brief interest in Ben during everything that happened with Captain Nemesis. Her giving him a little peck following him preventing her from being kidnapped, then inviting him to some social events before then later being rescued from Captain Nemesis, again by Ben. And later Jennifer goes down this really very genuinely dark path, falling for Nemesis as the both of them spiral into a really rather tragic, clearly abusive relationship. And moving on from that onto the very out there way Omniverse approaches Ben's love life, Esther ends up being Ben's main love interest during Omniverse, at least for the majority of the series, other than a character we'll get into shortly. Esther just has a great character design, I love the colour palette especially, and there's just so much chemistry between her and Ben. In researching for this video, I found out that the voice actor for Ben and Esther, that being Tara Platt and Yuri Lowenthal, are married in real life. Not that you couldn't just achieve that same chemistry in theory by acting, but I feel like you can really kind of feel that between the pair of them. Also major factor here, Esther is an alien, living with her people in Undertown, being introduced as not quite a villain, but definitely an antagonist to Ben. And in the exact opposite to Julie, Esther only appears in 5 episodes, but certainly feels like she makes such an impact on not only Ben, but the series more generally. If you'd asked me to guess how many times she appeared, I would have assumed she were in maybe twice the amount of episodes. A brief mention just for the sake of thoroughness, Sue Saturday, who, let me clarify, isn't remotely interested in Ben, but worth bringing up as probably the only time Ben's ever actively been nervous. Him forgetting how to speak, even if only briefly. I found it amusing either way. Back to actual relationships, and one I spoke about at length in a recent video, and the character who was briefly engaged to Ben, Princess Luma. If you want a more fully comprehensive look into her and their relationship, I'll leave a link to that video in the description, but for now, Luma comes down to Earth, at the time engaged to Kevin, following him somewhere between Classic and Alien Force, promising to marry her in exchange for a car engine. Following her quite literally pursuing Kevin, Ben ends up defeating her in combat, and in tradition with their species customs, she's now engaged to Ben. I think that's probably loosely related to how Tetraman women are stronger than the men. I really like Luma here. There's an unapologetic authenticity and sweetness to her, complemented only by how capable she is physically and otherwise. She tosses about absolute tanks like Armadillo and thrashes both Ben and Kevin multiple times. All the while, and at any point, she could command her armada to destroy the Earth. That, and while she's briefly engaged to Ben, there's a fun little moment of her introducing herself to Ben's mum, who's surprisingly accepting of all of this, though that's probably expected of the Tennyson family. All this ending with Luma, along with a character we'll get into shortly, realizing she doesn't need Ben, even if for whatever reason the show chose to have her realize that after Ben points it out to them. And speaking of, there's also Ataya, Luma's counterpart, her being another alien princess who has a lot more involvement in the story, going all the way back to the earlier days of Alien Force. Ataya taking an interest in Ben after falling for him during the Frogs of War two-parter, where he remains in his bullfrag transformation for a prolonged period of time. Her making her interest in Bullfrag extremely clear. Later coming to Earth, deciding Ben as Bullfrag is the only person worthy of her, this being at the same time as Luma's third appearance, where they're both after the same thing. Her and Luma both coming to the same realization that they don't need Ben whatsoever. A bit of an honourable mention, but hardly surprising that Ben would be so romantically involved with so many alien women come Omniverse, especially given Grandpa Max's pattern with both his presumable wife Adona and Xylene, who's somewhat involved or has been involved with him before. And finally, what I've been getting at from the start, Omniverse and their series as a whole's penultimate love interest, Kai Green, being Ben's first and last love interest, and certainly a divisive one. Omniverse quite literally telling us that they're destined to be together, their future son Spanner or Ken coming back in time to let us and them know that. All this presumably being a payoff to the pop-up in the classic series that says that Ben has a few girlfriends before meeting back up with Kai in the future. Which is all well and good, but it feels a bit out of the blue since Kai makes her way into the story so late into the game that there's not much time to develop it, making it feel like their destiny's been put upon these characters rather than it slowly developing, especially with the lack of chemistry between the pair in her reintroductory episode. Kai immediately not being too impressed by Ben, their relationship, at least pre-romance, being defined by bickering. Though I do find it really amusing that their Forever King kind of mirrors what the series or Destiny or whatever is doing by constantly making comments and telling them that they have chemistry. All this to say, I really like their future selves together. There's this really great dynamic between the two of them. They both feel like these really powerful independent characters who have a tenderness between each other, which doesn't really feel all too cohesive with their current day counterparts. The major aspect of their relationship worth mentioning, at least in current day, is Kai's tendency to only be interested in Ben when he's actively using a transformation, completely changing how she carries herself towards him, whether he's in his human form or not. It's a fun quirk of hers, but feels a bit odd to have this, knowing how they'd end up in the future. There are moments of proper chemistry sprinkled throughout their interactions, and that's really it. I'd say overall, the series handles relationships in a very mixed kind of way. There's some really high highs and maybe one really low low. I would be curious to hear what you think of each of Ben's love interests. Anyway, if you made it this far into the video and aren't subscribed, please consider doing so. Either way, I appreciate you being here. Thanks for watching.